people worked very efficient, and they worked very fast. And the interviewer said, well, why was that? How did that happen? And he said, Henry Clay said, well, you know, my enslaver had a very interesting invention. He had a very inventive mind, and he came up with a machine that made us work very quickly. Well, what was that? All right, Henry Clay said, I'll describe it for you. It was a wooden bench. And when somebody didn't work fast enough, they were tied down on the wooden bench, face down. And over the wooden bench was suspended a wooden wheel. And the wheel turned if you pumped it with a treadle, sort of a pedal, by foot. And attached to the wooden wheel was a series of leather straps about this long, so that it essentially whipped the person's back into jelly. And this, he said, made production very, very efficient where I was. And I thought about that, and I said, well, I guess it's possible. Enslavers were sometimes very, very inventive in this sort of way. Although, you know, the key inventions that happened here were really outsourced. The figuring out of how to pick faster was really outsourced by torture, by enslavers, with the means of torture and measurement to enslave people. But maybe it's not just a metaphor, but maybe it actually is a metaphor, and maybe it's actually both. And so I came to see the entire system of driving people all day, weighing to see if they met their quota, punishing those, torturing those, in fact, who didn't meet the quota, and then raising the quota as a technology, as the machine, the whipping machine, as Henry Clay put it, that drove the production of cotton in the South, and in its own way helped to drive modernization and the shaping of the world that we live in today. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Really provoking. I hope you have lots of questions. Let's hear from some students first. Good. I know my students have suggestions for what you might ask, but who wants to break the ice?
You said earlier that the price of cotton plummeted and this enabled the investment of something. I just wanted to ask if you could reiterate what that enabled, and then also what contributed to the plummeting price of cotton. Again, I realize you touched on those things, but really just elaborate.
So cotton prices were forced down because more cotton was being produced by the average labor, the average enslaved person, and the increase was reduced by some measures about 400%. So that pushes down the price of cotton even as demand goes up. If the price of a crucial input goes down, then essentially you as the factory owner have money to play with, as it were. You can make some decisions. Of course, these are driven also by what your competitors are doing. But you could decide to take some of that extra money and invest it in more efficient means of spinning and weaving that cloth into cloth, or you could lower the price to consumers. Those two things are probably things that happen most, although probably wage laborers get a little bit out of it and factory pursue profit. But as the price of, but as cotton manufacturers, textile manufacturers push down the price of cloth that they make, this enables many more people around the world to buy things that they couldn't buy before, and demands emerge that hadn't existed. Yeah.
Hi, my question is, what did, around the period, 1833, when this drastic shift started to occur, economically, what did Europe, and the rest of the world know about slavery in the South?
Well, they knew it existed. They knew that more and more cotton was coming out all the time. They knew there were some great investment opportunities in the United States. And some of these were handled by middlemen like banks in New York and Philadelphia. And in fact, the second bank in the United States was one of the players in that process. But some of them were handled by British middlemen like Baring Brothers, which was kind of ecosystem, and they were starting to tell their stories. Very hard to get away from somewhere like Alabama, that's a long, long way from the states, and the entire white society you had to make your way through was militarized against the state. But people still escaped, and they still told their stories. And to a large extent, white Americans and white Europeans looked at those stories and they said, they found ways to discount them. Yeah.
What exactly did the economists say about your book?
The Economist said a lot of things. To my mind, the most offensive thing was the way that they used Lupita Nyong'o's photo. One of their arguments was that, well, if enslaved people were so financially valuable as, as this book argues, and they were, the price of an enslaved man about 20 years old in New Orleans when Charles Thompson was born was close to $1,000, and you can figure out what that means in present dollars a couple of different ways, but the answers range between, depending on which method you use, range between $50,000 and $250,000 per individual. So they're very valuable, and the economist said, well, if they're so valuable, it just doesn't make any sense for enslavers to mistreat, physically abuse enslaved people. And so then they used a picture of Lupita Nyong'o as Patsy from 12 Years a Slave and said, Patsy was certainly a valuable property. And that's problematic on a couple of levels. Well, that's not a picture of Patsy, that's a picture of the person who's playing a role, and that person has a name. In fact, Lupita Nyong'o won the Oscar. But in addition, it's if you watch the film, you know that Patsy was treated with extreme violence. So it's pretty self-contradictory. But that was one of the arguments, which is that, well, capitalism is a totally rational system, and it's not rational for enslavers, and as good long-term thinking capitalists to mistreat enslaved people's bodies when they invested so much in them. So this just can't work as an argument. And then they also said it was a work of advocacy, and the other thing was, well, why should we believe the testimony of the former slaves? That was another one. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the estimate on the number of slaves moved from the old states to the new states?
It's about 1 million. Yeah. Out of a population, total enslaved population in 1790 at the start of this process was about 800,000 in the U.S., and it's close to 4 million by 1860. So there's some importing of enslaved Africans up to 1807, legally, a few illegally after that. There's a lot of natural population growth that's happening in Virginia and Maryland, and that's getting sort of skimmed off. And people are being sent to the new states at a great rate. Another way to think about this, if you were like the age of most of you in here, and you were an enslaved African American in Maryland or Virginia or North Carolina in 1830, the odds were about 25 to 33% that you yourself would be moved, usually by a slave trader, by being sold to a slave trader. But the odds that your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father, your wife or husband, that at least one of those crucial people in your life would be moved was about 99%. It was almost inevitable for people to. Yeah.
Yeah, could you say something about the provenance of survivor testimony and, its forms and how it came to be and how it got preserved?
Sure. So there are two kinds that I use the most. One is memoirs and autobiographies published, often in relationship to the abolitionist movement in some way, in the 19th century. And so some of these are very clearly texts that are completely under the control, if you send any author controls their text, of let's say, a Frederick Douglass or a William Wells Brown, or some of these formerly enslaved folks. Others are much more like interviews that are done with someone